good evening, and welcome to this Ramadan Conversation. We're all in this together. It's presented by the Affinity Intercultural Foundation of Australia. I'm John Cleary, and I'll be hosting this series of conversations presented throughout Ramadan. And Ramadan, of course, is characterised by the iftar meal, the breaking of bread amongst friends and neighbours. And last year, Affinity hosted over 45 house iftars and 10 institutional iftars around the country, including up to 350 guests. This year, of course, COVID-19 made that impossible. So Affinity has decided to carry Ramadan to this online virtual conversation. Ramadan Conversations is a daily 1-hour live Ramadan chat. Each episode will be live streamed and later you can upload on the Affinity's YouTube channel. As a former ABC broadcaster with a special interest in religion, it's my great pleasure to host these conversations together with a number of assistants drawn from the Muslim community. Tonight, we're joined by Abdullah Aksu. Born and raised in Australia, Abdullah currently holds the position of owner and director of Innovo Technology Solutions, an Australian IT services company, and he's also chairman of the school board at Affinity College. Abdullah, good to see you again.
Pleasure.
We're halfway through Ramadan. Is there anything you truly miss from the old Ramadan?
It's interesting how we say the old Ramadan and the new Ramadan, don't we? This COVID-19 has really impacted us significantly. I think, look, the biggest thing I miss is the big gatherings that we used to hold. I've mentioned previously as well, Ramadan is very much a social time for us, as well as the spiritual aspect. But having family and friends coming over for dinner, going to the Lakemba street food festivals overnight, or congregating at the mosque for prayers, or socialising with friends and family are things that we truly miss. And I guess another thing is that we're also missing the ability to host a non-Muslim family at our home. In past years with Affinity, I've had the pleasure of opening our home and breaking bread and talking about the significance of Ramadan with people from other faith backgrounds, but unfortunately we're missing out on that this year. So they would be the main things that we're truly missing from previous Ramadans.
And so, Abdullah, it's time to turn to our special guests. Tonight is an exceptionally important episode as we host two who could reasonably be called superstars. We'll be flying to the USA to converse with Boston Celtics NBA basketball player Enes Kanter, and down under, we're joining former Australian Soccerroo Craig Foster. Enes Kanter is a Swiss-born, stateless basketball player of Turkish origin. He currently plays for the Boston Celtics in the National Basketball Association, the NBA. A long-time professional wrestling fan also, he briefly held a WWE championship. Craig Foster is an Australian sporting national treasure. Following a distinguished playing career in both Australia and internationally, Craig has an equally distinguished career as a commentator and is perhaps best known as the chief football analyst for World News Australia and SBS television. Over all of this, however, is his remarkable one-man crusade to come to the aid of Hakim Al-Arabi, the young footballer caught in a three-way political tug-of-war for his freedom. Craig raised the support of the international football community and stirred governments in 3 countries to release and return Hakim to Australia when he could have faced prison and torture for some years. The story is told in his recent book, Fighting for Hakim. Most recently, Craig has been outspoken in calls for the sporting organisations of Australia to turn their strengths into support for local communities stressed by events of this past year, from the bushfires. Enes Kanter and Craig Foster, welcome to this Ramadan session.
Thank you guys very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Both of you are significant in your own fields, and its prominence achieved primarily through your performances on the field. yet you both have become more widely known because of your commitment to seeing sport as part of the fabric of our community, not just an end in itself. The path to that position is not one that the celebrity culture of sport these days is necessarily too sympathetic to. And unfortunately, due to the current pandemic, sport has been stopped worldwide. Perhaps the first question is, how has this changed things for you? Is it a welcome break, or like most of us, are you itching for the different sports and codes to begin again? Enes?
Yep. Well, I think, like, it was a heartbreaking news for all of us, and I think it hit NBA really bad. NBA was the first league that has suspended its league. I just actually had a really good conversation with Adam Silver today. For the NBA, it is all about players and fans' safety. But right now, there is something bigger than happening than basketball. Right now, I feel like we should focus on how can we get through this together. But right now, if you're asking me how am I staying in shape, I'm literally just trying to do push-ups and, just squats and, just sit-ups at home. Just literally, it is so impossible even just go to our practice facility. Like I said, all I can do right now, trying to just stay in game shape, I guess. It is impossible, but it's at my house.
Craig.
Yeah, look, it's wonderful to join you firstly. Thanks for the invitation. Great to see you again, Enes. We caught up last year in New York. I think, we were speaking at the UN, and I had the pleasure of hearing Enes speak on human rights in sport and what was going on, back in Turkey as well. And I was extremely impressed. So we've kept in touch since. I have to disagree with one point you made, John. That is that there's only one. Well, there might be three superstars on this call, but there's certainly not a fourth, and that's not me. But it's it's always good to share a stage with Enes again for a second time. In terms of sport, well, look, all of society had to pause for a while, and sadly, it often takes a crisis for us to have an opportunity or be forced to reflect and to consider where we are, consider where sport is, which is a big theme for all of us in that industry, whether players or otherwise. Thankfully, I'm too old now, Enes, so I no longer have to do push-ups and stay fit, but I can just watch from the sidelines. But more broadly, we're kind of all just considering, look, what is society? Why are people falling through the cracks so often? And my feeling when this first hit was that it was an opportunity for sport to rediscover some of its social justice bent, some of its social advocacy, its social responsibility, certainly. And instead of being so concerned about being a unique industry that had to continue when obviously all of society basically had to shut down except essential services, that actually we should be helping others now, people in the community that we don't normally get to meet, and sport as a huge industry, a socially influential institution, has a huge role to play there.
Guys, I've got a question specifically around sport and how it penetrates into every living room these days. It seems like it's a lightning rod for all sorts of issues, from politics to faith. We've seen in the US, it goes from Colin Kaepernick not kneeling to Daryl Morey and LeBron James' comments about China. And in Australia, we've seen the treatment of Adam Goodes. And we've seen that, in general, those taking a stand for what they believe come under intense social, political, and economic scrutiny. I feel it's, to some degree, it's the same for both of you as well. How do you understand this debate, and what do you think is the place of the modern sports celebrity? This is to both of you guys.
Hi, Craig.
Well, Enes, is doing a fabulous job over in US, and I've been really fascinated and pleased to see the way that so many Congress members and others have supported you in your quest around sport and human rights, Enes. Did you want to elaborate on that a little bit, and then I'll talk about the Australian context?
I mean, I will just say this. I mean, Craig knows it better, but sports bring people together, and you can be, you can believe in different things. You can, have a different culture, different skin color, but like sports bring people together. and then they just, when you have a platform, I feel like as a, not just an athlete, but if you have a platform as a like a, athlete, actor, singer, rapper, use that. I feel like we need to use that platform, because there's so many people out there are watching our footsteps, and all this. There's so many kids out there are taking us as a role model, right? So if we go out there and talk about some of the important things are happening in our world, in our countries, that it affects people, I feel like our young generation gonna do the same thing. So I feel like sports has to do a lot with it, and I feel like again, it's just we just need to go out there and stand tall for it, even if it means sacrificing everything. Because I mean, what Craig is trying to do, what I'm trying to do, is way bigger than football or basketball, way bigger than NBA, and way bigger than ourselves. It is because it affects millions and millions of people. So I feel like if God put us in this situation, we need to use it. It put us in a situation for a reason. So like, I mean, like I said again, especially after, I met Craig last year, and he actually gave me his book, and I read it. It was just incredible.
Thanks, buddy. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Every country is a little bit different as well in terms of sport. And one of the things that I particularly enjoy is how the NBA is an environment that facilitates, almost encourages, but certainly allows the athletes to talk about and protest on social issues, and whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's civil rights or there's a very long and very proud history of the NBA. It's actually, in that respect, one of the best in the world. My view, and I've spoken to Enes about this, is about the importance of the international human rights instruments. And I believe that athletes around the world can ground their public advocacy in those instruments. And by so doing, they can avoid a lot of the issue, the politicization of, the issues that they are advocating strongly for. For instance, in the Australian context, we had Kathy Freeman, who in, 98, I think the Commonwealth Games might have been 98, who had the two flags, and she was, attacked mercilessly for doing so. But just 2 years later, she was able to do that on behalf of, Indigenous Australia in the 2000 Olympics. That's important advocacy. So it won't surprise anyone that, like Enes, I'm a huge advocate of athletes around the world using this potential that they have. But I think it's important that they, that's why I think some human rights education for athletes all around the world through their players' unions, for instance, would be really worthwhile, so that they have a bit of an understanding. The Daryl Morey and Houston Rockets, was it? That issue was a really a valuable one in the respect that, firstly, it showed the economic coercion that, China are starting to apply on sport around the world, particularly around their own characterization of human rights. And secondly, it showed what happened with LeBron James, for instance. Now, LeBron James, I don't know him, Enes knows him, right? But he seems like me, like a fantastic human being. Yeah, Enes?
Oh yeah, he's on and off the court. He's a fantastic human being.
Yeah, so he's advocating for kids and education and all of these things, and for for African Americans, every day. And what happened was, he was placed in a situation where they were talking about freedom of speech, and but the economic pressures being brought to bear on the NBA by China were extensive, perhaps the greatest that a sport has had, maybe in history. There's like $500 million more of contracts. So he was placed in an interview in a position where, whilst he has a very strong social justice a spine, even he found it difficult to know what to say in that moment. And all he needed to do, in my view, was just to stick to, these concepts of international human rights instruments, freedom of speech being, a human right under the UDHR and other instruments. And you see, that's why it's so powerful when sport commits to human rights. So just finally, FIFA, of course, have human rights instruments, a policy in their constitution. However, their commitment to it is highly questionable. Our job is to make them commit to that. Basketball doesn't have one, and I'd love to see FIFA have one globally. LeBron, Enes simply need to say our sport globally, is bound by internationally recognised human rights, and so are we and our clubs and blah, blah, blah. And by doing so, we give athletes some protection, but we also happily actually use sport as a tool to the betterment of humanity from the global level. It's a really important movement.
Craig, let me just throw one in here from a sort of a parochial angle, but it's one that's had a bit of publicity in Australia. The whole freedom of belief question has come up in the last 12 months with regard to sport in Australia. It's had enormous press. You had the Israel Folau issue, and even this week you've got NRL players declining flu shots on sort of anti-vax grounds. I mean, there are, at the local level, you still have to be wary of boundaries and what are reasonable boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, as you'd be aware, John, it's always a balance of rights and freedoms, right? And so what you're talking about with Folau and others was this, freedom of religious belief and expression against, discrimination, anti-discrimination. And we have anti-discrimination legislation, of course, in Australia. So these rights are always balanced, and they can be complex discussions. We're not saying that it's always straightforward, but at least that's
where
the
do you come
discussion.
down on the anti-vaccination issue?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm not an expert on that, but I'd certainly love to see that. In my view, that's also part of their social responsibility, because they can put their teammates at risk. They can put their league at risk, and they can put their broader society at risk. And therefore, I think they have the right to their own choice. Absolutely. But if they make that choice, they don't have the right to then join the dressing room and play with others and put them at risk. That's my personal view. The issue with this human rights and religious belief is that usually it comes down to contracts. So what we know in sport is that sponsors put immense commercial pressure on clubs, and that transmits down to athletes. It's one of the main reasons why, every athlete in history, Billie Jean King, the Black Power salute, all of them have been demonised, often ostracised. But the point about it is, the sponsors are not the moral arbiters of society either. And so what has to happen here is that rather than grounding that into contractual agreements, it should be grounded in the human rights instruments that, all of us, have the right to look to.
Enes, have you felt the sponsorship pressure on the sorts of issues that concern you at any time?
I mean, I'll just say this. We were just talking about the freedom of religion and freedom of speech, right? So what I believe in is, it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what your skin color or your religion is. I feel like we need to leave our differences on the table and try to find what we have in common. And we only have one world to live, till, I always say this, till Elon Musk find another planet to live, this world is what we have. So I feel like we need to make this better together. And, if you look at, I give you an example of some of my teammates. When I talk about these issues, obviously, of course, my teammates have a lot of questions about, what's going on. But I feel like it is all about try to understand each other and try to not judge. So, I got no problems with my teammates or coaches.
So, Enes, you joined the NBA coming from Turkey and from Europe with a language barrier. How difficult was it for you to transition into the NBA and in the most competitive league in the world, being the NBA?
It was very tough, especially the first couple of months, because when I came from Turkey, and now in America, everything is different. The food is different, culture is different, the religion is different, everything is different. But the first time I come here, obviously my first couple of months was very rough. But then I'm like, you know what? This is going to be my home from now, so I better get used to it. So I was literally just trying to get used to everything here. I was going to McDonald's so I can just get used to American life. I was literally just watching some of the American shows so I can catch up the American street language. But I think my team, down the road, my teammates and the coaches helped me a lot. Because they were just because I see them so much, they become my brothers. But other than that, one thing I saw in America, there was so much respect, because obviously you guys are from different countries, different religions. But I think there were so many times I sit down on hotel room and start reading Bible, start reading Book of Mormon, so I can understand my teammates better. So that way, when they ask you something or when you ask them something, you don't or you don't offend them, or you don't you don't judge. You can understand each other way better.
Yeah, I might just add to that if
Enes,
I can, John, before
yeah,
you go.
great.
I've seen Enes, through his social media channels, where he's been also talking with, presenting to, and spending time with the Jewish community in Boston and elsewhere. And it's this cross-cultural and interfaith, interreligious collaboration, cooperation, breaking down barriers, building trust and understanding that's so important in the world today, in my view. And that's why, I respect and love to see what Enes is doing. There hasn't been a huge amount of athletes, capable or have that contextual understanding to reach out to other faiths as well and say, look, let's build trust through what we share here. And that's extremely important.
And if perhaps you can give us some outline briefly of your story and why at times you've come under pressure as somebody who has historic links to Turkey. You've been in some ways caught up in the politics of the situation out of your beliefs. Your beliefs have had a significant impact when it comes to the way the Turkish government believes you. Do you just want to take us through that briefly for the wider audience who may not be familiar with your story?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I remember when I first started talking about these issues, right? Because it all started back in 2013. It was my third year in league, and then till then, all I actually care about, all of my whole life, was just about basketball, only basketball. But then there was a big, corruption scandal happened in Turkey, and Turkish President Erdogan and his family and some of the congressmen close to Erdogan was involved in it. So, and then after that, I was still not paying attention enough. I was just hearing some news about about this scandal, and then, President Erdogan started to came out and put in people in jail. I'm talking about journalists who talks about these issues, or police who caught them, or the judges and prosecutors. They were put them in jail, and then after that, it just became a huge news in Turkey and all over the world. And then President Erdogan was just going around and start shutting down media outlets, schools, and dormitories and universities. And I was like, it doesn't matter who you are, even if you are like the president of the world. If you are fighting against against education, I'm gonna say something about it. So that was the first time I actually said something about it. And obviously, just because of I played NBA, it became viral here in Turkey and America. And then I was like, you know what? I feel like God put me in this situation for a reason, so I feel like I need to use it. So I remember after that moment, I mean, just because it's my second language, and just because I'm not a politician or journalist, I'm just a basketball player, it was so hard for me to talk about these issues. But then I'm like, I remember there was so many times my teammates, or like they were just going out to hang out, they were just going to the clubs, they were just going to eat. I was going back home to study, so I can understand, so I can tell the story better, But, and then after that, I remember that things got worse and worse, and I started getting this, just this interview requests from like big TVs like CNN or Fox, or like someone in international news. And I was like, you know what? I feel like, okay, I know I'm not a politician or anything, but I need to work on this stuff. But I think like the reactions I get from my teammates, they're asking me only one question: are you crazy? Because the things I have spoken or I told about, people are like you are affected, your family's affected, your dad just got fired, they put him in jail, they came to your house and raided the whole house, and they wanted to see if you are still in contact with your family or not. Your family put a statement out there and say they disown you. So like, my teammates, I keep asking me, are you crazy? But when I sit down and talk to them like this, one-on-one, and tell them, listen, this is not just about me. This is not just my story. I'm trying to use my story to tell about millions of stories out there. There are so many stories out there. It's way worse than mine, but just because of you guys know my story, because I play in the NBA. So like when I talk to them that way, not just my teammates, the politicians, the congressmen, senators, or like the coaches, the fans, they always telling me the same thing. How can we help you? You know? So I feel like we all have big voices. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are, who you're with. I feel like we just need to stand up tall for what's right. And I remember I was 8 years old. My mom told me, stand for what you believe in, even if it means sacrificing everything. And now I'm trying to do what my mom said when I was 9 years old.
Was there any evidence of pressure being put by the Turkish government on the US government or agencies to put pressure on you?
Oh yeah, there was so many times. I mean, I remember when I was in DC. I was meeting with this, lawmakers, senators, and congressmen. There's so many people over there that told me that Turkish government asked for your extradition back to Turkey. There were so many times, but you know what? It doesn't bother me because I know there is checks and balances and rules and laws in America. I mean, I don't even have a parking ticket in America. I'm a green card holder and I'm gonna become an American citizen next year. And it's crazy because like the Turkish government's like still actually trying to go out there and say they're trying to tell me that I'm a terrorist and stuff. When I hear this that terrorist whatever, that I remember I was going to a locker room. We sit down with my teammates and start laughing. I actually tweet something about it and said, "Only thing I terrorize is a basketball rim." But I mean, I don't really take him serious because I know my teammates know the work I have done for our community and all the charity work we all got done. So like, it doesn't really bother me. But you know what? I think we just need to stand tall for it.
Enes, it's a remarkable story. Abdullah, do you have any questions about Enes's journey, the story we've just heard?
Yeah, I guess some of what I had heard was that games that Enes was actually playing in were not being televised in Turkey. Is that correct, Enes?
It is very sad, and but it is correct. So, like, listen, it's wild, but so last year I was with Portland Trailblazers, and we made the Western Conference Finals. Like the whole world was focusing on us. Turkish, it is on the news. I mean, if you guys don't not believe me, you can just go on Google and type it in. Just because I play for the Portland Trailblazers, they did not show the finals, Western Conference Finals
Crazy.
in Turkey. And then I saw like the Turkish people's reaction. I'm like, they were getting mad at me. I was like, what did I do? All I'm trying to do is just play basketball here. Your government, your regime is a crazy one that just not show my games. But trust me, there's so many people went to like the VPN calls or whatever and watched our game. I mean, it's just very shame and very embarrassing of what they doing.
Yeah.
You're on Ramadan Conversations. Our guests, Enes Kanter and Craig Foster. My co-host is Abdullah Aksu. Let's just pause for a moment or two, reflecting on Enes's story as far as it's gone, and take a little music. And music this time from the, as we have each night in this program, music from the Sufi tradition. And time to welcome our musician, Sali.
Hello everyone. Tonight I will play something from Uşak scale mode, Arab satsamaisiz. These peshevs and satsamaisiz, it's always played beginning of the concerts to tune your ears and the melodies, and we call them satsamaisi or peshev. So here we go. I hope you enjoy it again.
Thank you, Sali, for that music from the Sufi tradition. You're with Ramadan Conversations. Our guest tonight, Craig Foster, Australian football legend, and Enes Kanter of the Boston Celtics. Craig, before becoming an elite soccer player representing your country, did you ever think that one day you'd be fighting for human rights? And how difficult has that transition been?
No, and it hasn't really been difficult. But you know, I always was involved in social programs when I was playing, even as a young player. And I would also, when I was a young professional, I would coach some of the youth teams as well, you know, and I got to know those young kids and their families, some of them Indigenous families, as it happens, and, you know, and we've been friends for the last 30 or so years. So I always kind of was just trying to do whatever I could off the field to help others. And then I started to get a little bit of a profile here in Australia. So that, as Enes knows, then every charity kind of comes and says, look, you know, we'd love your help. So I work with domestic violence, homelessness, women in crisis, and Indigenous children, education, and others. And then, you know, after I kind of started to get involved in different sectors of society and finished my law degree, then, you know, it was a pretty obvious path to take, because you go naturally, I think, from when you're an athlete and you feel strongly about things and you advocate for them. Very few globally doing it as forcefully and as cleverly as what Enes is doing, but many of them still feel strongly about things. But then you quickly realise that you have to make change on a broader scale, you know, and it's just that simple jump from, look, we're dealing with the symptoms to going to the root cause of problems, and that takes legal reform. That takes, you know, governance. That takes actually working with the charities, whether it's as a director or others, and you migrate into being able to make more substantial change at policy level. And so now, you know, because human rights it's something I feel strongly about, the equality between all human beings. I think it's a really important factor for us to create a better world, and we certainly need one. And that's also this concept of interfaith cooperation, understanding is equally as important.
Craig, the entire Australian community watched as the story of your fight for Hakim Ali Arabi, the young footballer from Pascoe Vale, my own home suburb, took place and unfolded across our television screens. But what for you were the moments of greatest and deepest frustration? And was there any level of disappointment with the Australian government at that level?
Well, everyone had to be pushed. You know, you had a kid. It was a really good example of the human rights fraternity and the human rights movement, if you like. You know, the ones who are most easily prejudiced and alienated and demonised are the ones who we have to fight for. It's like being in a team. I always say, people say, you know, where did this come from? I say, well, it's the same as being in a team, Enes. And I was former chairman and CEO for a while of our own players' union. And that it's not about Enes Kanter, who can, you know, I've seen him doing all his dunking and you know, he's a brilliant player. It's about the young one who doesn't have any rights. It's about the old one who's on their way out and the club just wants to cut with no medical support. You know, it's about the small ones. And that's what Enes is doing there in relation to standing up for everyone else, you know, back in other parts of the world. So it was the same for Hakim. No one really knew him. He played for, he wasn't a professional. And he was in deep trouble, but he was a part of my game, football, and he was a refugee, two things I feel strongly about. And thirdly, he was a Muslim. And I know from being on the Multicultural Council in Australia, something I feel strongly about is that the Muslim community in Australia rightly felt marginalised and demonised. And I want to do whatever I can to rectify that in the interests of a harmonious, multicultural nation and world. And so all those three factors kind of spoke to me, and so, you know, we had to go and get him. Now, the Australian government had their own political and other issues, and refugees and asylum seekers in Australia is a hugely fraught issue and continues to be one that I'm fighting for today. So, of course, he was up against it there, and they needed to be pushed. FIFA needed to be pushed. Bahrain certainly needed to be pushed, and the military junta in Thailand needed to be exposed, and of course there were royal families involved as well. So look, frustration, it wouldn't be the word I use. I mean, we got him out in 77 days. It was just a question of being agile, being able to balance aggressive advocacy with diplomacy. That's a fine line. That's not always easy to tread. We trod it successfully. And it's about using social media and the power of sport to amplify a message globally. So if there's any example of what sport can do, the sporting community gave Hakeem Al Arabi a face. He became almost as well known as Enes Kanter, right? And that's what sport can do. That's actually the power of global sports. Incredibly important. It's incredibly influential, but it doesn't use its power as effectively as it could because of politics and economic imperatives. So our job as former athletes is to help the current athletes and others advocate for sport to accept its proper social responsibility. Because if we bring human rights into sport globally, we can actually genuinely change the world.
Enes, in addition to speaking out for the plight of what's going on in Turkey, you've also been very hard-working with your basketball clinics for the underprivileged. And I know that you've been doing it predominantly in the States, but you were taking that overseas as well. And now the world's economy has taken a hit because of COVID. So for the next few years, there'll be a lot of people that'll be seeking some form of financial assistance. So how important will it be for those in the sports industry to volunteer their time or increase their charity over the next few years?
Very important. I mean, I feel like, first of all, I think with all this charity works, basketball camps or football camps with Craig and everything, we are invested in our future. Because whenever we have those, basketball. Actually, we are still thinking about doing basketball camps this summer, but virtually. So I actually have this crazy idea about, there's so many kids gonna come in front of their Zoom, and then I'm gonna just show them in my little living room basketball. I feel like just basketball or the sports shouldn't stop. We can do it in front of we can use technology to just keep it going. But I think the charity works and that you were talking about the kids, it is so important to inspire them because those kids are going to be going to become our future. So the future is in our hand. So if you want to shape it however we want to shape it. So that was, I think, one of the most important thing, I think, for the Craig too. There's so many players out there whenever they're done with their career, they want to look back and say, oh yeah, I had an amazing, just a career. But I think, I learned from people like Craig or whatever. The important thing is, the question you need to ask yourself is, how many people that you inspired, how many lives that you changed, how many hearts you touched when you're done with your career, because you're only going to play this game for maybe like 34, 35 if your body can take it. So once you're done with your career, you want to look back and say, okay, it should be bigger than basketball or soccer or football. It should be bigger than sports, what you're doing. So I think there's so many examples out there, that I see, there's so many NBA players out there, they're just done with their career and it is all about basketball. But at the same time, there's so many, just examples out there that whenever they're done with their career, they have done so much with their communities, with their, whatever country they're from or whatever city they're at. They just give back to them, and it is all about definitely off the court stuff.
Craig, what are your thoughts?
How do you deal with that?
Craig, I just wanted to hear your thoughts.
My thoughts on that point?
Yeah.
The power that athletes have to influence the next generation is extraordinary, and it's about building leadership in the youth is incredibly important. And there's a whole heap of ways to do that. One of them is to be present with them, to role model. For instance, what Enes is doing at the moment. They'll look to Enes and what will they see? They'll see courage, They'll see, you know, courage of conviction, believing in something, believing in his rights and the rights of others, you know, taking personal and family risks to back that up, and off the court advocating to Congress members to try and bring policy change. They see that. So the Boston Celtics kids are watching a player, which is very, very rare. I mean, you know, I did nothing of that magnitude. It's extraordinary what Enes is doing. You know, when I was 26, I was a Soccerroo, and I was speaking publicly around the here, which was a political issue, which caused some consternation. But this is very different. And when people take personal risk, you know, to fight for what they believe in and good causes, that's amazing. And the next generation can watch that. So you don't need as much need to say anything. You're just modeling what it is that you want to see in them. Then, of course, you have all of the free camps that Enes is putting on and so on, which is demonstrating once again that it's not just about economics. It's not just about money. It's about human to human. It's about people. There's other ways to do so, but one of the, you know, this is an important one. And what's happening at the moment with Ramadan, for instance, by bringing different faiths together, and I talked about seeing Enes speak, you know, in different Jewish forums. I happen to think that is incredibly important, because young kids are watching and they're saying, well, I believe in this, and this is my faith, you know, that I feel so strongly about. But what Enes is showing me is actually I can reach out my hand there and there's nothing to be fearful of, and that these are human beings and we can build, you know, bridges of understanding between us. In the same way that I'm trying to do on a smaller scale here in Australia by just fasting throughout Ramadan, you know, for this month. And, you know, and what I'm saying is I'm just extending my hand to the Australian Muslim community and demonstrating that we are the same. That we have a difference in beliefs, but that doesn't mean that we're different human beings. That means that we have to build these bridges of understanding. And when we can show the broader public, you know, and particularly those who follow sport, that that's capable, then it's really important. Of course, it all comes from sport, Enes, anyway. I mean, you know, we sit in a change room. You know, I always bring it back to sports, the lessons that we have. We sit in the change room with every religion. We sit in the change room with refugees and people born somewhere. We sit in the change room with every single flag, and that's what we do. And we run on the court and we fight together and we win. And, you know, and Enes goes on and wins titles. So off the field, we have to demonstrate that it's exactly the same. If there's no barriers to pass the ball to someone, then you know, figuratively off the field, we should also be able to pass the ball back and forth between us.
Enes, I got to pick up with something that Craig mentioned there. If you're fasting during Ramadan, this is probably a question you get from every 12-year-old kid who wants to be a basketball player, happens to be an observant Muslim. How do you survive during Ramadan? With the pressure it puts on your body.
Right. Well, yeah, I get that question a lot, but you know, I think I've been fasting since I am actually 8-9 years old. You know, so like I am used to it. The second thing is I actually try to fast once or twice a week during the season. You know, Mondays or Thursdays, or you know, Tuesdays or you know Saturdays. So I try to fast once or twice a week during the season. So when Ramadan hits, my body is used to it. And I feel like game of sports is mental over physical. So once you put your mind on it, I'm like, there's a really good cause of mind over matter. So I feel like, you know, just because of I was fasting, I wanted to show the whole world that I can do it, and this shouldn't be an excuse, that I'm like, I felt so amazing. You know, I was paying attention to little details. Because like, I know if I had a bad game, if we had a bad game, they were going to blame the Ramadan. So I'm like, you know what? I cannot have a bad game. So to me, it was very stressful. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? This is what my religion asking me to do. And I mean, God helped me. That's what I will say. God helped me for sure. But I felt amazing out there. But probably this year, I am having the easiest Ramadan I've ever had in my whole life. No practice, no games. You know, I don't go out a lot. I'm just like, there's like the house is not too hot. It's warm. It's cold. So like right now, I'm not having a tough time. But like when it's game time or when it's practice time, of course, like it is tough.
Enes, Yeah, so I'm a Portland Trailblazers supporter, and that's 30 years I've been supporting the Blazers.
Okay.
So when
Wow.
you came across and joined the Blazers, I was over the moon. I was so happy. Now, just on the theme of Ramadan, just continuing that, last year when the Blazers had that amazing run in the Western Conference playoffs, Game 7, I think it was, against Denver, you played close to almost 40 minutes in that game, and it was Ramadan again. So it was an extraordinary effort by yourself. But what about your teammates and the coaching staff and the whole organisation? What was the support like from them? And in general, when it comes to Ramadan and other Muslims, how are the NBA and the management and everything?
Right. The support that I think I see from my teammates and coaches, that is the one thing that gives me extra motivation. And obviously, you know, just seeing my teammates help, they were asking me like a lot of questions. Hey man, are you thirsty? Are you feeling okay? Are you feeling dizzy? That they were asking me so many questions, but like the respect I got from them was so amazing. I remember it was a Denver game. I told my teammates like, hey, you guys go ahead and start warming up. I'm just gonna, just break my fast and just gonna come out there with you all. But everybody remember we sit in the locker room and talk about Ramadan right before the playoff games. But the hardest part, I'm not gonna lie, the hardest part, it is fourth quarter. The game's on the line. We just call a timeout. I'm sitting, and my teammates are sitting right next to me, right? And they're just drinking that cold water and cold Gatorade. I'm like, oh God, this is tough. I'm like, this is the toughest part. But that was the toughest part. I'm not gonna lie. But like I said, respect and the support I saw from them was just gives me extra motivation. And then they have their own fast too, because like they fast, but they sometimes they give up something for 40 days, or they fast and they just only drink water. So like they have their own fast too. So it's not like I'm only talking about Ramadan. I'm asking their fasting. I'm asking their question, and we're talking about why is it so important to fast? What is the meaning of it? What is the thing behind it? I think it was a very good conversation with my teammates.
Excellent.
Well, we've just got time for another piece of music from Salih. He's playing music once again drawn from the Sufi tradition.
Hello, once again. Tonight I will play Hijaz Ilahi, words written by Yunus Emre and composed by Kutbi Dede. Dağlar ile taşlar ile. So it's in English. I call upon you, O Lord. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Sally. Once again, another beautiful piece of music, and those performances coming to us from Melbourne.
Excellent.
The whole COVID pandemic has changed our value system, and we've touched on this briefly, but it's changed. It's going to change the way in which professional sport is. So people were already talking about professional sport not being able to sustain the salaries of players. Talking about changing the structures of professional sport. And professional sport, both in Australia and the USA and Europe over the last 30 years, has become very much a me culture, a celebrity culture. You're valued by what you are to advertisers. Do you see those, both of you, see those sorts of things as being changed by this dreadful period we're going through?
Enes?
Great.
In honour preferring Craig, you go first.
Shall I go first? I think all of society is going to change, and I hope it's correct what you say, John, that the values are changing. I don't know that that's a given. I see a lot of good discussion, but I think there's going to be something of a battle once we kind of emerge out of this for people in social positions that they don't want to see changed, to, you know, try and, you know, keep the status quo as it was, right? Financially, of course, you know, it has changed for every industry, and that will change for sport. Will it give sport a stronger sense of its position in society, its kind of susceptibility, the same as anyone else, where sport has this concept of exceptionalism and always says, oh, we're different. You know, we exist over here, and everyone just comes and has fun, and we don't need to engage in all of these other social issues. And what they do is sport characterises them as political rather than as just actually what they often are is human rights. Is that going to change? I don't know. There's going to be a new financial reality, that's for sure. It's a very uncertain period for everyone. I do see a positive trend in society, which, and this might sound funny coming from myself, you know, and or Enes, but, you know, where this concept of celebrity is being deeply questioned, and that can only be good. Okay, so, you know, with the greatest of respect, when people are taking medical advice from a TV person, or they're taking climate, you know, environmental advice on Facebook from a reality television person, we're in deep trouble. You know, and in many respects, we are in deep trouble. So what this has done, you know, and we had the bushfires over here quite recently, Enes, you know, which you would have seen were really horrible. I know you sent some messages of support, which was lovely. Thank you on your social media. And what those bushfires have done has recrystallised people's assessment of expertise, you know, or people who have studied and researched and have done the work in a particular area, whether it's around bushfires, climate or others. Science is back on the agenda, which is only positive. And of course, you know, in relation to COVID, we're talking medical and health professionals. So this swing towards, you know, back to expertise can only be good. And if that means that athletes and TV people, you know, aren't going to be as influential socially in future, well, that's not a bad thing.
Enes?
I mean, first of all, bigger than sports, you know, this COVID, you know, thing showed me how much we need each other, you know, because we have one enemy to beat. And, you know, it's very sad because you turn on the TV, there's still people attacking each other. Oh, like in America, this side said this, Republicans said this, Democrats said this. But we should be focused on one main goal, and how can we get through this together? So like right now, you open up the TV, there's so many negative news out there. This channel's attacking other one, this channel's attacking this news outlet. But like the other thing is, I feel like the people who has voice needs to use it. Like athletes or, you know, just singers, rappers, they need to use it so, you know, the other people can, you know, can be educated, you know. But for me, I was actually just talking to Adam Silver today on the phone, And of course, he said it is going to affect a lot. They were talking about maybe some of the players giving up huge amount of their money because there's not going to be any ticket sales for a long time. There's not going to be any, arenas will be using it anytime soon. So like right now, there's going to be so much sacrifice that players was going to, and the owners are going to give. But I think they said today, I mean, I don't know how it's going to work, but they're still actually trying to play the season if it's all safe to go. But I mean, I don't know how much it's safe right now because I understand it's business. I understand, the people are losing so much money, but there is something bigger than money right now. People are losing their lives and losing their loved ones and losing their houses. So like, I don't know how it's gonna work. We have no idea.
Yeah, it's the capacity for sport to recover its historic roots as something that was key to building community.
Yeah, and particularly grassroots community sport is, incredibly important. And that's been one of the main thrusts of the last couple of months that I've been driving here in Australia through Play for Lives, which is, we call it Play for Lives, not points. And what that means is where sport can't go forward now, we can't play on field. So let's, repurpose our energy and our network and our influence to help vulnerable communities who need it right now. And so sport's made a huge social contribution as well here in Australia in that regard. But it's also an opportunity, though, for sport to reconnect with its grassroots. So, in the last 30 years, probably, it was only in kind of late 60s, 70 when Billie Jean King set up the WTA, the Women's Tennis Professional Association. So in a very short space of time, we've had an incredible amount of commercialization of professional sport. And in many ways, that has taken over this concept of, the community sport, how they're valued, how they're treated, the importance of social connections. Sport in community is one of the strongest network and connection factors that, the world has ever developed. And in fact, at the start of this pandemic, I saw some research out of Christchurch, which talked about their earthquake and how it was local community organisations, including and particularly sport, that made a huge contribution to keeping people together, because it's the trust through community organisations and teams. I mean, you're still on the NBA basketball court, Enes. I now play over 35s, even though I'm 51. I play here in Sydney and in the weekend games, and that team that we have, that's incredibly important for all of those guys who are involved. That's their social network, whether that's every week they train and play, and it never ends. So it's a lifelong network that we develop, and this is also important. We develop international networks through sport that we're able to bring to bear, hopefully to the end of good causes, and to try and put the world in a better place.
Craig,
Abdullah, any final observations?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. The first one to Craig. I understand you're showing support and empathy with the Muslim population by fasting the full month of Ramadan. What are your reflections of this? Has it been difficult for you, or have you felt any benefits you did not expect?
Okay, good question. It hasn't been difficult because I kind of, the older I get, the less I eat. Funnily enough, so kind of, I often just have one meal a day, right? I don't need more, because what you learn as an athlete is whilst food is a beautiful social is a social tool. It's about love, from people cooking for others and so on. We also understand it as athletes as a fuel, and it's it's fuel in and production out, right? And so I like to, one of the things about food, I think, is going off track a little bit, but I think that food controls people, and I like to, athletes are also control freaks. We control our environment, we control our intake, we control our mental state, we control, right? And you're taught rightly that you have to at least control the things that you can, because the outcome is uncontrollable. And so therefore I like to control food, because I think, certainly in Western society anyway, it has taken on a life of its own, and all of the advertising and so on means that people predominantly overeat and for no good reason, actually, and US is a great example of that. So anyway, fasting actually was really, really easy. The only difficult part was the water. You know, not being able to have any fluid during the day. I don't think I've ever done that before. You know,
Yeah.
and so when I get to the end of the day, the people say, oh, well, it must be nice to have the meal. The thing I look forward to the most when it hits like 5:30, 6 p.m. here, and on the little calendar that I have, you know, from Ahmed Polat, it says I can break fast now at this time, right? I check it during the day, and I've got a glass of water here, and that water is the most gorgeous thing that you could ever imagine, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And to answer your question, the thing about it was twofold. One was to demonstrate solidarity with the Australian Muslim community and elsewhere, but because I want to demonstrate that we're all the same and that no one should be demonised. And secondly, it was also to reflect in gratitude. And I also want to spend 4 or 5 days just actually fasting consecutively, just to contemplate for the first time in my life to actually try to have some kind of understanding of what happens to the 700 million people worldwide who don't have enough food to eat today.
I think that's an appropriate place to wind this conversation up, Abdullah.
John, can I ask one final question?
Sure.
Sorry, I did have to, and I think this is very important given the dates today. So tomorrow, Sunday, the 10th of May, is International Mother's Day. And I want to start off by asking Enes, and we'll also ask Craig for his thoughts. But Enes, what is your message to your mother, who I know you haven't seen for a long while, and to all the other mothers in Turkey who have had their freedoms taken away from them?
Yeah. I think one thing I miss most about my mother is definitely my mom's cooking. You know, because it doesn't matter even if you go like the most expensive restaurant, it can never beat your mom's food, you know? So like,
It's true.
it's tough because last time I saw my family wasn't back in 2015, and last time I talked to them, I cannot even remember. So like I think for me, obviously it's my mom, and not just my mom, but my dad and my sister. But like one thing I will just say, you know, just it is so important to just call your family and say I love you, because we don't do it enough, and once you lose it, you understand how valuable, how important it is, you know. But I am still one of the lucky ones because there is so many mothers right now are in the jail with their kids, or with their kids outside of the jail with their mother in the jail. So like, I am one of the lucky ones. I'm not complaining about it. I'm praying for it every day. But like, all the kids out there, man, just call your mother and tell them how much you love them, because you never know when she's gonna be taken away from you, you know? It's definitely priceless to just see your mom smile one time and just tells you how much she's proud of you, tells you how much she's proud of you. So like, if you're watching this, man, just turn this off, call your mom and say I love you.
Craig?
Yes, look, I've been, incredibly fortunate. You know, I still have both my parents with us whilst we don't live close to each other. You know, we connect every few days, and my mother and father are well. That's already something to be very grateful for. I also have 3 children, and so my own wife's, and Lara is an extraordinary human being. So, and we're in a position here where we're safe. We actually have a house where many don't have, and many don't have, the opportunity to call their mother. So to me, the Mother's Day is a chance to say thank you, to say we love you. And it's also always a chance to just look on the other side of the coin as well, all of these times, and to think about all the kids who don't have parents, who've been in foster care, all those kids around here in Australia and around the world, because they're the ones who really need our help.
Okay.
Craig Foster, Enes Kanter, thank you so much for joining us for this Ramadan conversation. Enes Kanter, Boston Celtics hero. Craig Foster, former Soccerroo, SBS broadcaster and human rights activist. It's been our pleasure.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure's ours. Good to see you guys. Be well, Enes.
Thank you.
Well, Abdullah, that's just about all we have time for in today's program. Thanks for being part of the team again.
Yeah, it was a great program. Very interesting listening to Enes and Craig and their thoughts. A fantastic show.
Yeah, real privilege. And thank you all at home, or wherever you happen to be, for joining this Ramadan conversation. Our next episode will be tomorrow in recognition of Mother's Day. Over the past week, our conversations have featured a number of well-known guests, so if you wish to view this or any of this series of Ramadan Conversations, you can find them on the Affinity YouTube channel. Stay safe. Have a blessed Ramadan.